to allow us to hear from to learn from the insights and lessons that you picked up in your impressive career, with a specific focus today on your insider's perspective on two different political parties, their role in amplifying or stifling marginalized voices, and also the role they play in sort of the health of American democracy today. A couple of small, easy topics for a Friday afternoon. So I'm going to quickly begin by introducing Beth, and then I'm going to give you a couple warm-up questions. Then we're going to watch a brief clip. We'll enter into a conversation, and then we'll open into an open Q&A with all of you. Quick housekeeping note: all of our tableware and bowls are compostable, so please, when you're finished, use the right receptacle on your way out. So, first elected to the Hawaii House of Representatives in 2012, Beth Fukumoto was the youngest woman in the United States to hold the legislative caucus leadership position. Beth was also the first elected Republican to leave the Republican Party following the election of Donald Trump. As a result, you were stripped of your leadership title in response specifically to your criticism of the president at the Hawaii Women's March, which we'll hear a little bit more about in the video clip. Beth's story was widely covered in the media, from Slate to the Wall Street Journal to Teen Vogue. And before coming to HKS, Beth was most recently serving as the executive director of the Democratic Party of Hawaii. So, for our first question, in your bio, you write that you're dedicated to building a more inclusive government, using technology to improve civics education and to facilitate productive dialogue between people in organizations that hold oppositional perspectives. But would you just share in a few words, when you get up in the morning, like, what are you most passionate about and most excited to go out and do in the world?
Most excited to do in the world, I think, I want to make people that think that they completely and totally disagree with other people realize that they have a lot in common, and to help them understand that and feel more sympathy for what people are going through that they might otherwise just completely and totally disregard. I think that's the best way to improve democracy, and I think especially in the middle of a presidential election, I wake up every day thinking we really need to be better at this, because if we don't, then it's going to be really hard to save democracy.
Excellent. So the second question: you have a very accomplished career, so I'm going to list some of your accolades already. Beth was named 40 under 40 Rising Political Stars by the Washington Post, 8 of the most influential millennial women in U.S. politics by Business Insider, World's 100 most influential young people in government by Apolitical. You've received the James Madison Fellowship from the Millennial Action Project and a Rodel Fellowship from the Aspen Institute. Question is, after all you've accomplished, why did you come to the Kennedy School? not that you shouldn't have come to the Kennedy School, but just to help us understand, what you're looking to learn and to do.
Yeah, I was 25 when I got involved in politics, and within a year I ran for office. Within a year after that, I was a Republican state chair, and then had a series of leadership positions that I never really had any training for. I mean, I went home one day and just was so frustrated with government and said to my sister, who was 20 at the time, like, I think I want to run for office. I have no idea what to do about that, but I'm pretty sure we need to buy some signs and knock on some doors, and I need to find a list somewhere so I know who I'm talking to. Will you help me? And recruited a bunch of friends to do the same thing, and took all these positions and learned leadership completely and totally on the job, which means that when I needed to find a new job, I couldn't describe any of it to anybody because I had no formal training in what it means to be a leader and how to lead organizations. So the Kennedy School seemed like a good place to do that, and I think the most driving factor was that when I left the legislature, I left very, very disheartened with the direction of democracy, and realized that if people weren't paying attention, then it's not really a democracy anymore. If voters aren't voting, or aren't voting on based on any policy or on anything that they believe, then that really is undermining democracy in a way that an elected official can't fix. When you're an elected official, you're sort of acting out this game that we've all bought into. But if you don't believe that the system works, then you have to get outside of it to change it. And I tried for a while to change it inside and failed, and thought maybe I just need to get out of it and make something different.
Great. All right. So we thought we'd start with a short video clip to give some background information. And could you introduce this clip for us?
Yeah, so this is I chose this clip in part because it was the first clip that we have after I switched parties. And particularly because this woman, Liz Pine, who some of you may know, who is running the interview, is now like a superstar, trying to sort of have a millennial perspective on feminism, and just wrote a book that she's promoting. So I would suggest everybody follow her. I love her work, and I wanted to highlight it here.
Strong women standing up to injustice is a Hawaiian tradition. Beth Fukumoto is one of these legendary women. She's the youngest woman to become a caucus leader, and one of the very few Republicans to put her job and life on the line to criticize Donald Trump.
You were the first millennial to hold a position in the Hawaii state legislature, and also the youngest woman to be the leader of a caucus. What were some of the barriers that you faced being both a woman and being young too?
So the first time I ran for office, it was 2010. I think I was 25 maybe when I decided. Whenever I talk to women candidates, I talk about how much more pressure there is on what you look like. People say, you know, don't wear red because you're only too powerful. Don't wear pink because you look too female. People wanted me to cut my hair, wear glasses.
Fake, like, no prescription?
Fake glasses. I think that's something women specifically deal with. We've been trying to talk women into running for some time, so I'm really excited that women are actually starting to win.
What makes women different in politics?
I think that women are more willing to come to the table to talk about things. Women are also more willing to sort of risk it all. And then we see that with Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris. And I think it's because when you're in politics and you're a woman, you've overcome all these things, that what's one more? Like, why not go out and criticize Trump? Because whatever, it's like another man telling you what to do.
Right.
And we're so used to confronting that.
Speaking of risking it all, you were one of the very few people in the Republican Party who dared to criticize Donald Trump. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that and what happened?
I felt like it was my responsibility to keep speaking up. And for me, the most motivating thing was all the little girls and all the women and just everybody that watched the election that just felt crushed that I was in a unique position to have a microphone. Right. So I had to use it.
And what happened when you did?
Well, I spoke at the Women's March, and I think that was probably the culmination of what was a year of speaking out. The ballroom full of men and women tossed insults and booed me because instead of pledging to support my party's nominee, I said I thought his remarks were racist and sexist, and they had no place in the So I was kind of constantly in hot water with my party anyway. But at the Women's March, I really had no idea it was going to be as explosive as it was. I said all those things. I just said we owe it to little girls to do better. And I had, within 24 hours, people calling me for the Republican Party, saying you have to step down. I realized I ended up losing my leadership position. I didn't know all that was going to happen. But looking back on it, I'm still really glad I said something.
And what would be your advice to a young woman who is interested in running for office or wants to stand up to politicians or a way of doing things, but is maybe too afraid to do it?
I think just being yourself. Everybody tries really hard to make you not be yourself, right? And cut your hair and wear the glasses or whatever it is. And if you don't do it as yourself, there's no strength there and it's not authentic.
Well, you're certainly an inspiration to many, many young women. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, Hawaiian women are so boss. They're so humble and deserve way more promotion. I just came up with the perfect slogan. Hawaii, come for the beaches, stay for the badass bitches. And that's not just in Hawaii.
So that was an excellent choice. Thank you. In seeing this clip and in the conversations we've had over the year, I'm really struck by the intensity of the response that you had, sort of the vitriol and the criticism,
Yeah.
the media spotlights, the losing your post position, in to hear that it came in a way that was so unexpected. So if you don't mind, if you're willing to sort of reflect on what was the most difficult part of that for you, number one, and then number two, how it sort of changed your trajectory from there, personal and professional.
I think the most difficult part for me was first of all, that I really prided myself on being a good strategist and sort of climbing the Republican ladder well. And so to have this event that I completely misread was frustrating and humbling. But I think much more than that, it was extremely sad because it wasn't just me in the Republican Party that was trying to make change. We were trying to build a more inclusive, diverse Republican Party, which seems laughable right now. But 5 years ago, it didn't, right? 5 years ago, the Republican National Committee was putting out an entire research study saying that the Republican Party had to change. They had to diversify. They had to change their methods. And I was a part of helping to change that. I had the opportunity to speak nationally on these topics, to encourage diverse communities to get involved so that their voices would be heard in the Republican Party. And for me, this represented a loss of like a very important thing in American democracy, which is a moderate, reasonable Republican Party. And as excited as I was to be able to stand up for what I believed in, it still represented a loss that everybody else in the party that had stood with me previously suddenly wouldn't now that he was the president.
Yeah. When you mentioned earlier that you had worked inside the system and now you're looking for another way to affect change, do you still think that running for elected office, and this is in part for others here, is an effective way to make change?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I think it's an effective way to make change. I've tried to balance my time here at the Kennedy School. Anybody that's ever asked me whether or not I think they should run for office, I've said yes, definitely do it. If you feel like you put up with a lot of the stuff that comes with it. At one point during the party switch and everything, I was getting death threats regularly. I was getting trashed all the time on white nationalist threads. And so it comes with a lot of baggage, but there is so much opportunity to make change, especially on a state and local level. I mean, that's where the decisions are really being made. And it's not as hard to run for office as people think it is. It's a great thing to do. For me, once I had gotten to a point, and I served for 6 years, and I loved it, and I got to a point where I was just so overcome by this fear of what was happening to democracy that I just felt like the position I had in the legislature was not the right place to fix that. So my work changed, but I still very much think people need to be there and make change at that level.
Okay. So just to understand the decision that you made to speak out against Trump, could we just sort of go back and revisit that a little bit? And what was the sort of story leading up to that decision, and was it how much was a principled stand against this one person? How much of it might have been some pivoting ideologically or otherwise with the party? Just help us understand that for you.
I had taken every chance I could to move up the leadership ladder in the Republican Party locally in Hawaii, but that was in part because I just very much believed, especially with the rise of the Tea Party, that I really didn't really disagreed with. I really believe that there was a chance to create a centrist party in Hawaii, particularly because we had such conservative Democrats, because we had a very regressive taxation model. There was an opportunity to introduce progressive taxation as a Republican, to introduce progressive housing reform as a Republican. And I thought that that was a space, and that there was an ability for Hawaii to show how the rest of the Republican Party, for whatever reason, even if it was just to recruit more diverse candidates or more diverse voters, the Republican Party had an opportunity to return to the party of Lincoln or Roosevelt. It didn't work, but it seemed for a little bit like there was a chance to do that, and I really, really pushed for that. And when things changed nationally, I wanted desperately to protect Hawaii's ability to be a leader in changing the party. And I worked hard to speak out whenever I could. I was the only woman of color to hold a leadership position in the entire Republican Party nationally. I was one of very few millennials to hold a position of leadership. And for those reasons, I was in a unique position to say something. And there was a moment when I was sitting in a bar in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of Republicans, and we were talking about the registry, the Muslim registry that Trump was proposing at the time. And I said, as a Japanese American who had family members who narrowly escaped mass incarceration just on the basis of their ethnic background in the United States, I know that the U.S. does these things to people. So it continued, and the Republican Party at the time kind of just kept brushing off. This is just Trump's rhetoric. Don't worry about it. He's using it to win. This can never happen. It absolutely happens in the United States. And so for me, we're seeing it now at the border. So for me, that was the point that I just said, it's time, regardless of what it's going to cost, because nobody can do it but me, really. That's when I started speaking out.
And so once, then there was a period where you transitioned to the, rather than out of politics,
Yeah.
you transitioned to the Democratic Party. So maybe tell us a little bit quickly about that transition, and then what you found within the Democratic Party that was maybe similar, more similar than you expected, or more different than you expected from the party you parted.
Yeah, so I left the Republican Party after the Women's March. I did have the opportunity to stay. They offered to keep me as leader if I would agree to and sign an agreement not to speak against Trump for the remainder of my term as leader. And through
It's not like a letter.
right, for about a week, I told them I wouldn't do it, and they kept throwing different things at me, and I finally decided I have to leave. And I'm not gonna resign. You're gonna have to take me out in public on the floor, and it's gonna be messy because I want people to know what this looks like. And I did think, and in that process, that's when all the national media kicked in, and thousands of people from all over the country started reaching out to me saying, your story is my story. I was a Republican. I don't know how to affiliate. I didn't like the Democratic candidate, and I just feel lost, and I feel like there's no hope, and I'm marginalized. And we got all these great postcards and letters and news clippings and everything. It was fantastic, and I was sort of riding this high of feeling like I did something really great. And then the Democratic Party in Hawaii basically said, well, we're not gonna take you automatically because you're a Republican, and we're gonna institute this new rule that requires you to get voted in, and if you're not voted in by the party, then you're not gonna ever be able to run again on the ballot as a Democrat. And so the Democratic Party put me through about 3 to 4 months of interviews and different rounds where I had to be able to talk about the platform. I had to answer to every vote I ever took, and everything was scrutinized, from my personal life to how my parents vote to every single bill that I ever took, anything that I ever said, people found, and people brought it to these public hearings, and I needed to really, I needed to work my way into the party, and the rigidity of that process, in one sense, I loved it because it gave me the opportunity when I ran for Congress later to say I've been the best vetted Democrat ever, and nobody else on the stage with me has had to go through that process, and I'm confident that I will win every time if we go head to head on Democratic policies. So it gave me that, but it also is a signal for, you know, the rising intolerance for difference in the Democratic Party. And because I had joined the Republican Party in 2009, I saw the rise of the Tea Party, and I saw the precursors to Donald Trump, the electorate that elected Donald Trump, and I did worry that the same thing's happening in the Democratic Party.
So, I mean, their story is fascinating, and I think before we open up the floor, maybe we could ask you to comment on the state of the world today a little bit. So the polarization that you mentioned, is that sort of our biggest problem, or certainly one of them? What is the scope of the issue, and in your mind, and what is the role of the party mechanisms in creating that problem, or maybe solving the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would first say we spend a lot of time bemoaning the increase in polarization in American politics. My undergraduate thesis was on religion and its influence in the Civil War. I mean, talk about polarized. Preachers were polarizing people from the pulpit. We don't have that as much anymore. You know, we're also not in the middle of a civil war. So we've been this polarized before. I don't think that that's necessarily the problem. I think that it's happening a lot faster, and that's dangerous. It's harder to counter it. And I do think that we're seeing this rise of fundamentalism and frankly, bigotry. It's something that's running through parties where people will not even consider that the other side has value. It's dehumanizing. We're seeing it in debates, we're seeing it in commercials. They're dehumanizing the other so rapidly that it's leaving a lot of Americans just not knowing where they stand, just feeling disenfranchised and like they don't want to vote anymore.
Yeah. What is the role of the parties in the, what you've just described?
I think what happened.
Fueling it, or
I think they are. I mean, a long time ago, and I was in discussions. I remember when it switched in the Republican Party, and when people decided it was more important to win than anything else, right? I was a valuable voice for them and a face they put on TV because they thought that was the way to win. And as soon as they saw the rise of Trump and saw a different path, they switched quickly to that path because all they wanted to do was win. And I'm seeing that same thing running through the Democratic Party. I do think the parties are falling apart, right? Donald Trump's an outsider candidate. Bernie Sanders is an outsider candidate. The institutions and the boundaries of both parties are being disrupted, which is probably a good thing for politics, but it's going to be painful.
Yeah. If the parties are being marginalized, is it in terms of setting the agenda, or is it elevating the prospects of individual candidates, or?
Yeah, I mean, in 2016, in speaking with a number of the higher ups in the Republican Party, my criticism was that they lost control. They had cultivated this base of people that when you talk to them, they said, yeah, absolutely, they're white nationalists, they're racist, they're not voting for the same reasons that we want people to vote, but we need them, they're in our coalition, and we're going to keep cultivating them. So I think the parties are cultivating that still, but I think as more and more Americans refuse to participate and don't see themselves in either the Republican or Democrat camp, I think both parties are going to have a problem.
Is that an opening, in your view, for a new party on either end or in the middle?
Yeah. No, we always come down to two parties. It seems like, you know, during the Civil War, right? We saw the rise of Republicans with Abraham Lincoln, and the Whig Party just sort of disappeared. I think even if you end up with a third party, there's a disappearance that happens of that third party at some point.
So it's hard to ignore the fact that we're in the middle of the primary season.
Yeah.
Are you actively involved in any of the campaigns?
I am not. I've been an Elizabeth Warren fan, which I mean you can tell from the clip for a while now. But I have not been involved in part because I don't care who comes out as long as they can beat Donald Trump, right? I mean it matters. It matters what the future of the party is. But this is not just a struggle for the future of the party. This is a struggle for the future of the country, and I just don't feel like at this moment I'm prepared to enter a fight within the party. I'd rather wait and fight after. Yeah.
Great. So I'm sure everybody has lots of questions. So why don't we open the floor for Q&A. There is a microphone, two microphones. So if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, and then if when you get the mic, just introduce yourself and ask your question.
There's one here. Hi, my name's Leah. Thanks. This was as fascinating as I expected. Appreciate it. I'm curious if you could say more about how you think about your undergrad thesis and your lived experience, how you think about religion being either divisive or unifying in your political strategy and in thinking about party difference as well.
Yeah, I recently published an article about the Kavanaugh hearings. I guess not that recently, but when it happened, and did say like I heard throughout his testimony the dog whistles to evangelicals, and knew at that point this guy's definitely getting confirmed, and yeah, both parties have used religion. Both parties still do, in different ways, and it, of course, has an impact because it helps people believe in something, right? I think one of the problems we're having in both parties, other than Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, people are failing to make Americans believe that there's something better. And people are constantly looking for belief. Religion used to play that role. My master's thesis was on the World of Warcraft, the video game, and how it promotes national narratives and national ideologies about frontierism and violence and the ability to regenerate our country through violence. And for a while, that's what we believed in, right? When we were in World War II, we believed in this country. But we're not believing in anything anymore, and that's the bigger problem, I think. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Hi, I'm Chen Yingyue, an Asian fellow here at Art Center. I think you have a very splendid video, and also your answers let me know, all of us know your personal experience in the Republican parties, so I think it's so good. I personally focus on the studies of social media and political participation. So since we know that Donald Trump used social media a lot, especially with Twitter. So could you share us your experience how to utilize social media in your campaigns and publicize yourself in politics and as a Republican member? Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. I will say I've been on a social media break since I left office. I felt like I really needed it, and realized it's time to re-enter. It's been about a year, so it's time to start again. But it's a great tool. It reaches people that need to be reached. I think that we need to be more responsible with it, and I've seen a lot of candidates be very irresponsible, not just on the right, also very much on the left. and misinformation can spread so quickly that it is very dangerous. I think just tactically speaking, I found that Facebook Lives are fairly helpful. It's now, social media is reaching a broader audience. You can get to older voters now through social media where you couldn't before. And we are seeing, I think the upside for me was always, it was a really good way to present a more authentic experience of who I was and what my daily life was like. And I mean, I always hoped that would just then encourage other people to run for office and do the same thing.
Hi, my name is Tharan. Thank you for being here, Beth. Really appreciated your talk. To your point about the fact that there doesn't really seem to be a viable future for a moderate third party, what do you think the existing parties need to do in order to attract moderate voters? And right now, who do you think is doing a better job?
So I'm going to start by controversially saying I think moderation is kind of a lie. I think most people have very strong viewpoints on a couple of issues, and we lump all those people together into highly partisan people, which is not true. They have very centrist opinions on different issues. The problem is that between Democrats and Republicans, or progressives and liberal Democrats, or whatever group we're talking about, we're not taking the time to actually hear what the other person is saying and to take a compromising approach when that's the best way forward, right? We all know that you learn very quickly serving in a legislature that you can come in with the most strident beliefs in a particular policy, but it's not going to come out that way because you're dealing with hundreds of other people. And the inability for both parties, and unfortunately for an increasing number of elected officials, to actually see how compromise can work and how to manage the losses for people that do make compromises is the actual problem. I think people should wholly and completely believe strongly in what they believe in. Maybe that's being really aggressively moderate, I don't know. But I just find that people fall all over the spectrum depending on the policy, and that to continue to categorize people into only these three things is just adding to the problem of not listening across different lines.
Hi, Beth. Great job. I'm biased. I'm in your class. I love you, but
Much appreciated.
It's a great job. It was a great job.
But going back to the gentleman's question, the third party, I know you say you don't think it's viable.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking practically speaking, right? Like, I agree people want to have their beliefs, but I guess if you're gonna say people born after 1970, we in our jobs and even in our social circles, we tolerate and work through differences and accept it that that's just the way the world is that
right.
I'm not going to agree politically, what have you, or even with my faith or what have you, with my coworkers, people on my basketball team, my soccer team, but that doesn't stop us from hanging out. It doesn't stop us from going to work and doing great job, making great things happen. So it seems like either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party have the ability to speak to that group of people that every day make difference work, and that is the norm. That it's not this unique, weird thing. It's just I have friends that believe this on whether they're pro-life or pro-choice or whatever, but we still go to church together, or we still go to the movies together, wherever the kids can be. We work together. There's no problems, there's no fights, there's no enmity between us. What would it take for there to be a third party that spoke to this group, which is growing more and more, because even the younger kids, thankfully, are growing up with the reality that everybody is different, and that's beautiful, and that's great, and that's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And so what do you think it would take for there to be? Because I think that there would probably be more people than most people believe right now who would go to that party if they felt that it legitimately, in your point, celebrated the difference and didn't see that as as a obstacle, but rather as something to look for and actually seek out as a means to continue to get better and grow.
Yeah. So another part, having a third party is the dream, right? I mean, I think many people want to see another alternative, but historically speaking, it looks like the United States is just very much set up to have even third parties spin out of the collapse of other parties. So maybe the Democratic Party collapses and splits into liberals and progressives. Maybe the Republican Party collapses into George W. Bush Republicans and Trump Republicans, and that could happen. But I think that continuing to chase that is not helpful at the present moment, because we don't see that happening anytime soon. More than that, I think we are seeing that Americans are less and less likely to do what you just said, even going to church. But Americans are less and less likely to talk across difference anywhere, even at school. And so we do need to learn to fix that. And a lot of that is being able to look as a legislator, looking at policies. And for example, I had a bill to tax real estate investment trusts. I introduced it as a Republican. In Hawaii, 98% of housing is developed by real estate investment trusts that are out of state. And they have a tax break in our state, and they have a tax break with the federal government, and they pay absolutely nothing for $1 million apartments that take land from local people. And naturally, that'd be a Republican thing that Republicans would hate that, because it's taxing developers and slowing development. But I found the way to pitch it to Republicans, and I found the way to pitch it to Democrats, and I think we're not spending enough time, especially legislators are not spending enough time, trying to find those areas of agreement and speak the language of both parties to get some kind of a compromise on an issue. And I guess I would say it's possible, and it's giving up too quickly to say that we can't do it that way instead.
Did it pass?
It did, yeah.
Wow.
Sure did.
I think we had a just lovely question.
Hi, I'm Andy Vizilis. I'm a community member. I live just down the street, Newton Corner, so it's a really great place to come and hear some good discussions. I'd be interested to hear something about the last 3 lines of the title, "The Voiceless Electorate That Could Save Democracy."
Yeah.
So if you could expound on that.
Yeah, well, I think I go back to the thousands of emails and postcards from people that were extraordinarily moved by something that I didn't necessarily realize was even moving, right? I mean, I stood up and I made a speech, and fine, that was brave at the time. I get that, but these people saw that story and felt so compelled by it that they wanted to write to me and talk about it. And since then, I've met so many people that feel lost and feel like they're in this sort of partisan purgatory with me, in a place where neither party is they're not willing to give either party and pledge complete and total fealty to every single thing the party believes. And those people make up the majority of America. And as each party becomes more and more rigid, we're leaving them out. And there's enough of them. If we can talk to them, if we can get them engaged and get them to start telling people, hey, cut it out. We want you to pay attention to what the other side is saying. We want you to make compromises. I don't care whose idea it is. I want you to vote with Republicans sometimes because they were right, or I want you to vote with Democrats sometimes because they were right. And if those people start actually, this is getting maybe overly Machiavellian, but if those people start punishing elected officials that do behave in an overly partisan, and I will use the word again, bigoted way towards people who are different, then things change. But we need people to start talking to those individuals that just feel left out right now.
What are some of the mechanisms to give those voiceless members of that electorate a voice? Is it just at the ballot box? Is it organizing? Is it social media? Like what do you tell those folks if they actually say, "What should I do?" What would you tell them?
Yeah, if they say, "What should I do?" I would say, start. One, don't just disengage, because a lot of them have disengaged. Look for the people in your community that agree. Consider running for office yourself and staying firm to the belief that, you want to be different. And, and I think the media needs to do a better job of promoting voices that are calling for that. We keep talking about civility and better discourse and all of that, but it's not enough. I mean, I think we're brushing over the severe divisions that we have when we simply say, "Hey, let's talk to each other better." But the media has an opportunity to put those voices on television and in debates start calling out in the Democratic debate, how we really don't even seem to be talking to minority voters anymore. And those voters are also very much not having a voice now. And I think we just all need to be a little bit better at reminding people all the time that is true.
Great. So we have time for some more questions.
Hey, Beth.
Hey.
I don't know you whatsoever. Complete stranger. I don't know her, I swear. So kind of building off of these last questions, what I think about is someone who comes, like, I've worked in DC, but I'm from Middle America. And when it comes to Wisconsin, and we see this happening, if there's that middle ground, the moderate base, the middle class, and it kind of builds off what you're discussing here, they're a huge population that is not polarized, but they're being forced to choose.
Yeah.
And it partially comes from the fact that the media focuses so much on what sells.
Yeah.
And you have these big conglomerates that push selling over quality news reporting. So it becomes like this unhealthy cyclical process. So like, how do we, again, mobilize, but also how do we hold, I guess, reporters and journalists and the entire cycle accountable? And how do we kind of start shifting that dime to make, I guess, moderacy in the middle class sexy again, right? So, thank you.
Yeah. We need funders that are willing to fund media organizations that are dedicated to that. There are a few out there that I think try, but we need more. I think we should look at changing some of our requirements for getting a broadcasting license. We need to go back to fairness standards. I personally believe that we need to make sure that we're giving more equal time to different opinions. There are a lot of things that we can do in that department, and I've many times said that we just need to be better. These headlines for people getting along could be much better at being clickbait, right? We could, if we had journalists and writers and speakers and politicians making an effort to make it sexy and to write sexy headlines, it does start making money, and it does start rewarding these media companies. We're just not really trying hard enough.
I think we have a question.
Hello.
Hey.
My name is Perry. I'm a senior at the college. I'm actually from Central Oahu. So I grew up. Yeah. So I just have a question concerning this discussion about third parties.
Yeah.
In Hawaii, we don't really even have a second party. If anything.
True story. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about how the Republican Party in Hawaii tried to maybe reform itself in the early 2000s. Do you think national politics ultimately prevented the local Republican Party from making necessary reforms?
Absolutely.
And if that's the case, can you maybe comment on how that's going to probably continue to affect a lot of local parties that are affected by national politics?
Yeah, Hawaii realized long before the National Republican Party that Republicans were failing with a diverse electorate because Hawaii is such a diverse state. And so there was an effort made, and I was very much at the front of some of that at a certain period of time. There was an effort made to try to moderate our message, dig down into what the community actually wanted, and focus on those issues, including housing reform, and to change the narrative about Republicans in Hawaii. There's this historical narrative that, you know, Republicans are white and Democrats are Japanese Americans, and that's just the way it is. And so we made an effort to change that. Obviously, being Japanese American, I had an opportunity to very much make a difference there. But as the National Republican Party started to realize the same thing, we were of value to the National Party. But what I was surprised by was that when Trump showed that there was an alternative way, that we didn't need to diversify, we didn't need to let new people in, we could still win. Even the local party in Hawaii decided that was an easier route. And one of the things that I think we're all fighting against in each party is that it is easier to be angry than to try to do any of these other things that actually make progress. I don't know what the future is of the Republican Party in Hawaii. You're right. It's essentially non-existent at this point. But I don't know what hope there is even nationally when a lot of the Republicans are just leaving. Republicans that could make change have just sort of given up. Yeah.
So I have one last question, but if anyone else does, I don't want to take up all. Excellent.
I would love, thank you very much for this talk, but I'm just curious, I'd like to know how you feel about Tulsi Gabbard.
Fantastic question.
So glad you got it.
Yeah. I will tell you a story about Tulsi Gabbard. When I was a Republican and went to Congress to visit our delegation, she took me into the Republican caucus room on the House floor and introduced me to all the big names. Kevin McCarthy's cell phone number is still in my phone, and told them that I was the best person to win the congressional election as a Republican. She introduced me to a bunch of Republican donors, all those things. And when I went to switch parties and reached out for her help, she was not interested at all. And I think that experience really sums up Tulsi. She has a very conservative background that she's not fully answered for, and has been quite power-seeking over time. I do think that she believes very strongly in going her own way, which I respect a lot about her, and has done it sometimes at her own risk. But being elected means being able to play well with others, and she has also not really done that. Yeah.
So the last question I had is, what are we going to be hearing about in the future from you, Beth?
Yeah.
You don't have to lay all your plans now, but just
Yeah.
to give us a sense of what you've been thinking about.
I have two projects I'm working on. One is, I'm hoping to do a political commentary in the 2020 cycle. But two projects that I'm working on. I came here to work on a memoir that has now turned into, after many leadership classes, a satirical leadership book. A lot of our leadership, a lot of our leadership books are written by men or wealthy women who didn't have to deal with a lot of the things that many of us have to deal with when we get into leadership at 25. And I'd like to write something that's accessible to 25-year-olds jumping in with no experience, and it is messy, and your personal life is on the table, and that's messy, and you deal with all of it. And I hope that will help inspire other people to stop waiting until they feel ready, and just jump in and make a difference. So there's that. And the second thing, I came here really questioning was whether or not democracy still works, whether or not I still believe in it. Is democracy worth saving? And I've gone back and forth. But I am working on a series of articles that talk specifically about that. What have I learned that makes me think that there's something worthwhile here in this experiment that we're still in? What's worthwhile? What's worth saving? How do we do that? Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you for being so open, and just your courage and commitment and thoughtfulness is really quite inspiring. It's really been on display today. So please join me in thanking Beth. Thanks everybody again for coming.